Blood. That was the first thing I saw on Daisy's back that Tuesday morning. My Holstein cow, as gentle as a lapdog, was trembling in the barn with a red mark that looked like a burned L on her black and white coat. Next to her, tossed on the straw like a twisted trophy, lay an electric shock baton with the Crescent Oaks Homeowners Association logo on it. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. 15 years as a police officer taught me to keep my anger in check, but I felt my fingers trembling as I petted Daisy's snout. I had retired from the force just 8 months ago, swapping the streets of Chicago for this little ranch on the edge of Crescent Oaks, looking for peace after 2 decades of seeing the worst of humanity. Looks like evil found me even here. My routine was simple. I woke up with the sun, fed Daisy and the chickens, worked in the garden until noon, and spent my afternoons fixing the fence or reading on the porch. The smell of fresh hay mixed with strong coffee every morning made each day feel like a small victory against the stress that nearly killed me in the city. The closest neighbors were half a kilometer away, and I rarely saw anyone besides the mailman and the boy who delivered the feed. Crescent Oaks was a strange experiment, half luxury condominium with identical houses and strict rules, half rural area where owners like me could have small herds and crops. That balance worked well until 3 months ago when Eleanor Jenkins became the head of the Homeowners Association. While checking the security cameras I installed after the 3rd fine for improperly cut grass, I found exactly what I expected. Eleanor Jenkins, 53 years old, dressed in her flawless pastel suit, was on my property at 3:47 in the morning. The footage clearly showed her coming toward Daisy with the baton, shocking her, and then admiring her work with a satisfied smile. "Thomas? I'm on Mom's cell. Can I come over today?" Rebecca's message from my 16-year-old niece blinked on the phone. Like a gift from heaven, that girl was a tech wizard and exactly what I needed at that moment. When Rebecca arrived in the afternoon, her eyes went wide when she saw Daisy's injury. "Who would do that to a cow?" she asked, adjusting her glasses as she examined the videos on my laptop. "The HOA president. She sent 3 notifications last month saying that Daisy's mooing was noise pollution," I explained while showing the letters with the official Crescent Oaks stamp. Rebecca typed furiously on the keyboard. "She has a drone surveillance system, Uncle Thomas. I found the files on the association server. Eleanor is spying on everyone in the neighborhood." The sound of an engine interrupted our conversation. Through the window I saw a white Lexus parking at the property entrance. Eleanor Jenkins emerged, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled, her high heels sinking into the soft earth. "Mr. Blackwood," she began as soon as I opened the door without waiting for an invitation, "I've received complaints about unpleasant odors coming from your property. This violates Section 7, Paragraph 12 of our regulation on. You electrocuted my cow last night," I interrupted, my voice calmer than I expected. "I have it on video." Her smile did not falter. "I don't know what you are talking about." "Now, about those accumulated fines." "I also know about the drones, Mrs. Jenkins," Rebecca said as she appeared behind me. "And about the $47,000 you transferred from the association's account to your campaign for county commissioner." Eleanor's face paled for a moment, but she quickly composed herself. "You have no idea who you are dealing with," she hissed, spinning on her heel. "Fix these violations within 48 hours or face the execution of your property." When her car disappeared down the dirt road, Rebecca and I exchanged glances. "We'll need help," I said, grabbing my cell. "I know a journalist who would love this story." Harrison arrived the next day, with graying hair, a crumpled notepad, and a fierce curiosity that made him the best investigative reporter in the county. He listened to our story, went over the evidence, and nodded determinedly. "She's running for commissioner?" "That changes everything," he murmured while photographing Daisy's wound. "But we need more than just accusations. We need to catch her red-handed." A week passed since Eleanor's visit and our lives turned into a surveillance operation worthy of my police days. Rebecca installed additional cameras at strategic spots around the property, while Harrison dug into the HOA finances and talked to other disgruntled residents. Every day more people came to us with stories about Eleanor Jenkins' tyranny. On Thursday night, we were sitting in my kitchen looking over documents when my cell buzzed with an alert. The outdoor cameras had picked up movement. "She's back," I whispered, watching the screen that showed Eleanor sneaking across the pasture with something shiny in her right hand. And this time, she brought a pair of pliers. "Let's catch her," Harrison said as he already got to his feet. "Hold on," Rebecca interrupted. "If we act now, she'll come up with an excuse. We need to let her do her thing first." My blood was boiling as we watched Eleanor approach Daisy, who was sleeping peacefully under a starry sky. The cow opened her eyes when she sensed the strange presence but did not move, too confident for her own good. "Damn noisy cow," Eleanor's voice came clearly through the directional microphone Rebecca had installed. "After you cut your fence, you'll wander around the neighborhood causing so much commotion that your owner will be forced to move. No one challenges Eleanor Jenkins and gets off free." It was the perfect moment. I activated the irrigation system I had set up just for this occasion. Instantly, jets of water burst from the ground and soaked Eleanor from head to toe. Her cry of indignation was cut short when the spotlights turned on, illuminating her like a captured criminal. "Good evening, Mrs. Jenkins," I said calmly as I walked toward her with Harrison and Rebecca right behind me, the latter recording everything on her cell. "Looking for something?" Eleanor looked like a wet cat, her pink suit now stained with mud, her makeup running down her face. "This is private property. You can't attack me like that," she protested. "Interesting that you mentioned trespassing," Harrison replied, pointing to the pliers in his hand. "Could you explain what you intended to do with those at 11 at night in my pasture?" I was just checking for possible violations," she stammered, hiding the pliers behind her back. "With a pair of pliers? After you admitted on audio that you planned to cut my fence and free my cow?" I shook my head. "You know, Mrs. Jenkins, there are laws against animal cruelty in the county. And I still keep in touch with many of my old colleagues from the police department." Panic flashed across her face as the realization hit. "You're a cop?" "Retired. But I sure can recognize a crime when I see one." She backed away, trying to regain her composure despite water dripping from her disheveled hair. "This is not going to work, Blackwood. Tomorrow I'll start the process to execute your property. You have no idea how much power I have in this community." "I do," I replied calmly. "And I also know you're using the HOA funds to finance your political campaign. That would make a great headline, don't you think, Harrison?" Harrison smiled and jotted something down in his notepad. "First page for sure." Eleanor paled under the spotlight. "You don't have any proof." Rebecca stepped forward, showing her tablet with financial spreadsheets. "I have access to every record from the association since you took over. Every single misused cent is documented here." For a moment I thought Eleanor might break down. Her legs trembled slightly, but then something shifted in her eyes, that cold, calculating look I knew well from interrogations with dangerous criminals. "This is defamation," she said, regaining her posture. "You will hear from my lawyers in the morning. And as for you, Missy, hacking private systems is a federal crime." In fact, I interjected, "As the HOA president, you made those documents publicly available to all the members. No one hacked anything. Rebecca is my authorized representative for association matters." Eleanor stared at us for a few seconds before turning on her heel and marching toward the gate, leaving a trail of muddy footprints. "Now we have to act fast," Harrison said after picking up his notepad. "She's going to hit back with everything she's got." "I have an idea," Rebecca said, her eyes sparkling with that intensity that reminded me of her mom. "What if we turned this into a community event? Something that would make Daisy a local celebrity?" 2 days later, colorful posters appeared all over Crescent Oaks announcing the first annual MooFest, a rural celebration with food, live music, and of course the chance to meet Daisy, the county's most famous cow. The event was set to take place at my ranch the following Saturday. "You're crazy," said my neighbor Doug as he helped set up the tents on Friday. "Eleanor is going to explode when she hears about this." That's exactly the point, I replied as I checked to see if Daisy was comfortable in her newly decorated barn. The more people who see what's happening, the less power she'll have over us. What I hadn't told Doug, or anyone except Rebecca and Harrison, was that Daisy was hiding a secret that would make MooFest even more special. Dr. Martinez, the local vet, had confirmed the week before that Daisy was about to give birth to her first calf. According to him, the birth would happen right during the festival. On the morning of MooFest, I woke up before dawn to a low, steady moo coming from the barn. Daisy was lying on fresh straw, breathing heavily, her big eyes fixed on me as I entered. "Today's the big day, girl," I whispered, stroking her head. "Let's show everyone who really runs this place." People started arriving around 10 in the morning. To my surprise, the ranch soon filled up, not just with Crescent Oaks residents but also with folks from nearby communities. Families spread out across the pasture, children chased after the chickens, and a line formed for people to see Daisy, who watched everything calmly even though she was far along in labor. "T.O. Thomas." Rebecca ran up to me, holding her tablet. "You won't believe it. The post about MooFest went viral. Harrison says a reporter from KBTX is on the way to cover the event." I looked around, amazed at the transformation. My little ranch, once a lonely retreat, was now filled with life and laughter. It was as if Crescent Oaks had finally found its true identity, not in Eleanor's strict rules, but in the community that was coming together spontaneously. At noon, with the sun high and the temperature rising, Doug went up to the small makeshift stage to thank everyone for coming. That's when I noticed the white Lexus suddenly parking at the entrance. Eleanor emerged, accompanied by two men in suits, probably lawyers. Her face was twisted in a mask of controlled fury as she marched toward the stage. "This is a direct violation of Sections 3, 7, and 12 of the Association's regulations," she shouted, grabbing the microphone from Doug. "This event was not approved by the Festivities Committee. All of you are taking part in an illegal gathering and—" A loud moo interrupted her speech. All eyes turned toward the barn, where Daisy was now standing and clearly in labor. Children rushed closer, fascinated, while the adults formed a respectful semicircle. "What is going on?" Eleanor demanded, her voice now muffled without the microphone. "Daisy is about to have a calf," I announced, calmly walking toward the barn. "And everyone is invited to witness the miracle of life, something you tried to take from us with your suffocating regulations and bullying tactics." The crowd murmured in approval and a few people clapped. Eleanor advanced, determined to interrupt the moment, but in her hurry she didn't notice a small puddle on the path. Her heel sank into the mud, and she fell spectacularly onto a fresh pile Daisy had left just minutes before. The brief silence soon gave way to the sound of a child's laughter, then more laughter until everyone was openly laughing. Eleanor got to her feet, her beige suit now splattered with brown stains, her face flushed with humiliation. At that exact moment, as if on cue, Daisy let out a deep moo and began the final stage of labor. For the next hour, everyone present, including the newly arrived TV crew, watched in respectful silence as new life arrived. A little female calf, small and perfect, with spots that looked like a heart on her flank. Rosie, I decided immediately as the little creature struggled to stand for the first time, its trembling legs finding strength under Daisy's protective gaze. The birth of Rosie turned MooFest from a simple celebration into something almost spiritual. Entire families gathered to snap photos with Crescent Oaks' new member, while Eleanor, forgotten by everyone, crawled back to her car leaving a trail of bovine mess behind her. That night, after the last visitor had left, I sat on the porch with Harrison and Rebecca, watching Daisy and Rosie resting under the stars. "She is going to call a disciplinary meeting," Harrison said as he took a sip of coffee. "Probably on Monday." "We're ready," replied Rebecca, showing her tablet. I compiled everything, the videos of her attacking Daisy, the suspicious bank transfers, the drone recordings spying on the residents. "It's more than enough." I closed my eyes for a moment and listened to the night sounds, Daisy's soft moo, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog. For the first time since I moved to Crescent Oaks, I felt like I really belonged here. Not just as an isolated owner, but as part of a community that had finally found its voice. "You know," I said as I opened my eyes to watch the cow and her calf in the moonlit pasture, "I think Daisy ended up doing more for this community than any regulation ever could." Rebecca smiled, her young face wise beyond her years. "Sometimes it takes a cow to show people what really matters." The disciplinary meeting was scheduled for Monday afternoon in the Crescent Oaks Community Hall. We arrived an hour early, me, Rebecca, and Harrison, to set up our equipment and organize the evidence. Dr. Martinez was also with us, ready to testify about Daisy's injuries. "Nervous?" Harrison asked as he adjusted the projector we would use to play the videos. "Not at all," I replied. And it was true. After 15 years defusing hostage situations and facing armed criminals, a HOA audience sounded almost trivial. "And you? Ready for the big story?" He smiled and showed his voice recorder. "First page guaranteed, no matter what happens." The hall filled up quickly. To my surprise, it looked as if all of Crescent Oaks had shown up. I saw Doug with his family, Mrs. Petrovich from the local store, even Reverend James from the Methodist Church. Everyone was chatting excitedly, many still talking about the dramatic birth during MooFest. "I think you become a local celebrity," Rebecca whispered, pointing at a group of teenagers taking selfies with makeshift t-shirts printed with Daisy's face and the words "Don't mess with my cow." At exactly 3 p.m. the back door opened and Eleanor Jenkins entered, accompanied by her 2 lawyers and the rest of the HOA board. She had regained her impeccable composure, dark grey suit, freshly styled hair, perfect makeup hiding any trace of the humiliation from 2 days earlier. But her eyes betrayed her as they met mine, flashing with barely contained fury. "Thank you all for coming," began the HOA vice president, a man named Walter who always seemed more like a puppet than a leader. "This disciplinary meeting has been called to discuss the multiple violations allegedly committed by Mr. Thomas Blackwood, including improper use of residential property, organizing an unauthorized event, disturbing the peace, and direct disobedience of the Homeowners Association guidelines." Eleanor nodded vigorously at every charge mentioned, her fingers drumming impatiently on the table. It was the stance of someone who already knew the outcome before the trial began. "Mr. Blackwood," Walter continued, "how do you plead?" I stood up slowly as all eyes turned toward me. "Before I respond, I would like to file a formal counter-complaint against Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins for trespassing, animal cruelty, misuse of association funds, illegal surveillance of residents, and abuse of power." A murmur ran through the hall. Eleanor abruptly got to her feet. "This is absurd. We are here to discuss your violations, not to hear baseless accusations against me." "I have proof of every claim," I replied calmly, signaling to Rebecca who started the presentation on the projector. "And I believe everyone here has the right to see exactly who is running this association." For the next 2 hours the disciplinary meeting turned into something that resembled a trial. We presented footage of Eleanor attacking Daisy with the electric baton, audio recordings of her admitting her plans to vandalize my property, financial records showing suspicious transfers to her political campaign, and finally images of the drones she used to spy on the residents' backyards and windows. With every new revelation, Eleanor's face grew paler. Her lawyers whispered among themselves, clearly unprepared for the amount of evidence we had. The other board members looked equally stunned, especially when we showed that their own homes were being monitored without their knowledge or consent. "That explains how she always knew about every little violation," commented Mrs. Petrovich as she stood up. "I even got a fine for hanging clothes in the backyard where no one could see them." Other residents began sharing similar stories, fines for leaving the trash out 10 minutes past the allowed time, warnings for curtain colors that were never formally approved, penalties for having visitors after 10 p.m. "The regulations exist to protect the value of our properties," Eleanor finally managed to interject, her voice slightly trembling. "Everything I did was to ensure that the rules were followed strictly." "The rules that you interpreted and changed to suit your convenience," Harrison shot back, displaying copies of the original regulations alongside the modified versions Eleanor had quietly implemented, without board approval or a vote from the members. Walter cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Jenkins, do you have any response to these charges?" Eleanor looked around like a cornered animal desperate for escape. For a moment I thought she would simply deny everything, hiding behind her lawyers. Then something unexpected happened. She laughed. A cold, calculated laugh that sent chills down my spine. "You really don't understand, do you?" She stood up and adjusted her blazer with practiced dignity. "Without me, this place would have turned into a glorified collective farm. No standards, no order, no value. I did what was necessary to preserve what Crescent Oaks represents." "And what exactly does Crescent Oaks represent, Mrs. Jenkins?" I asked calmly. "Because from what I saw this weekend, it represents a diverse community that can coexist respectfully, celebrating both urban and rural life." "Country poetry," she scoffed. "Let's see how long that lasts when property values plummet because your neighbor decides to raise pigs or paint his house purple. I would rather have a neighbor with pigs who respects my privacy than someone who uses drones to spy on my yard," someone from the audience shouted, and that brought about general applause. Walter banged his gavel in an attempt to restore order. "I believe we have enough evidence to reach a decision." He briefly consulted with the other board members, who nodded solemnly. "This disciplinary hearing is now officially turned against Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins. Based on the evidence presented, the board unanimously votes for the immediate removal of Eleanor Jenkins as president of the Crescent Oaks Homeowners Association, pending further investigation into the misuse of funds and possible criminal violations." The hall erupted in applause. Eleanor stood motionless for a few seconds, as if she could not believe what she had just heard. Then, with a sudden movement, she grabbed her purse and walked toward the exit, stopping only to cast one last look in my direction. "This is not over, Blackwood," she said softly so only I could hear. "You have no idea what you've unleashed." I watched her leave feeling not anger or revenge, but a sort of pity. Eleanor had built her entire identity around controlling others, and now she was completely alone. The meeting continued for another hour as the board began the process of reviewing the HOA regulations. I was surprised when Walter suggested that I take over the vacant presidency, a proposal that was met with enthusiastic approval from those present. "Thanks for the trust," I replied, "but I'd rather be just a farmer with a famous cow. However, I suggest we create a special amendment to the regulations, maybe call it the Daisy Clause, that specifically protects the right of rural owners to keep their animals without undue interference." The idea was approved by unanimous acclaim, along with the formation of a more diverse committee to review all the existing rules. When we finally left the community hall, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the identical roofs of Crescent Oaks. "And now, Uncle Thomas," asked Rebecca as we walked back to the ranch. "What's next?" I thought about Daisy and Rosie waiting in the barn, the new friendships formed at MooFest, and the feeling of finally belonging somewhere after years of isolation. "Now," I replied, "let's just live. And maybe plant a little more alfalfa. Rosie is growing fast."